If you can dance a proper waltz, I'll marry my son to you." The words sliced through the glittering ballroom like broken glass. Gregory Lancaster III, whiskey glass in hand, smirked as every head turned toward the woman on her knees. Alicia Monroe, 36, had just dropped a tray of crystal flutes. The crash still echoed against the marble floor, mingling with the orchestra's awkward silence. 200 guests, Manhattan's wealthiest, bathed in golden chandelier light, watched in delighted shock. A ripple of laughter ran across the room. Some guests covered their mouths as if scandalized, though their eyes betrayed amusement. Others leaned in closer, savoring the spectacle. Gregory lifted his glass higher, voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, shall we have a little test? If this employee can outdance my wife tonight, then my son will be her prize." His son, Daniel Lancaster, 28, flushed crimson. "Dad, enough," he muttered, but Gregory waved him off, savoring the control, the spotlight, the cruelty disguised as entertainment. Alicia remained kneeling, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered the shards, yet her eyes told a different story. Not shame, not fear, something steadier, unreadable. The scent of champagne and cigar smoke hung in the air. The chandeliers glittered like 1,000 watchful eyes. No one spoke. Even the orchestra had faltered, bows hanging mid-air, waiting for what would come next. Gregory's wife, Evelyn Lancaster, watched with a faint, venomous smile, one hand on her pearl necklace. The entire hall felt suspended, like the moment before thunder breaks. Then Alicia rose, slowly, purposefully. She wiped her hands on her apron, straightened her back, and met Gregory Lancaster's mocking gaze. "I accept," she said. The word cut clean through the air. Gasps, nervous laughter, a few whispers darted between the rows of tuxedos and gowns. Gregory blinked, momentarily stunned. He had expected tears, an apology, maybe even her retreat. Not this. What did you just say?" he asked, a trace of doubt slipping into his voice. "I accept your challenge," Alicia repeated, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "But when I win, you will honor your word. Every word." The orchestra froze completely. Glasses stilled mid-air. Somewhere in the back, a guest let out a half-choked laugh. The absurdity of it all, the cleaner challenging the wife of Gregory Lancaster before Manhattan's elite, was too much for them to resist. But Alicia didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just stood there, her chin lifted, her eyes locked on the man who thought he owned the room. And in that moment, no one noticed the flicker in her gaze, a flicker that didn't belong to a clumsy cleaner, a flicker that hinted at something far greater, something buried and waiting. The silence stretched, and then, almost gleefully, Gregory clapped his hands once. "Marvelous! Let the show begin!" The crowd erupted in laughter, a cruel wave crashing over the woman at the center of it all. But Alicia Monroe didn't laugh. She only exhaled, as if preparing herself not just for a dance, but for the night that would change everything. The crowd was still buzzing after Alicia's bold acceptance, but beneath the laughter, a quiet unease began to creep through the Lancaster ballroom. The setting itself was designed to intimidate. Crystal chandeliers poured light across marble floors, so polished they reflected every step. Waiters in white gloves floated through with trays of caviar and champagne. A string quartet hovered in the corner, bows suspended, unsure whether to resume or watch the drama unfolding. The entire room smelled of expensive perfume, roasted lamb, and the sharp bite of whiskey. This was Gregory Lancaster's kingdom. Tonight was the grand opening of Lancaster Tower, his latest skyscraper, a monument of glass and steel rising above Manhattan. He had invited the city's elite, politicians, bankers, celebrities, all eager to bask in his orbit. Gregory thrived on moments like this. A towering man in his late 50s, silver hair slicked back, tuxedo tailored to perfection. He enjoyed turning people into props for his amusement, feeding his guests a steady diet of spectacle and dominance. At his side stood Evelyn Lancaster, 50, draped in emerald silk. She carried herself with the kind of poise that came from years of teaching ballroom lessons to Manhattan's wealthiest families. Evelyn had a reputation, elegant, ruthless, and very aware of her social rank. She leaned closer to her husband now, smirking. "Darling, do you really think I need to lower myself to compete with her?" Gregory grinned, loud enough for all to hear. "Nonsense, my love. You won that Waldorf Cup last year. This will be nothing more than a demonstration." Laughter rippled again, cruel and rehearsed. And then there was Daniel Lancaster, their son, 28 years old, standing slightly apart from his parents. Unlike his father, he didn't carry arrogance in his posture. He shifted uneasily, hands in his pockets, eyes darting between Alicia and the floor. He had inherited his mother's sharp cheekbones, but not her coldness. To Daniel, this wasn't entertainment, it was humiliation, and he wanted no part of it. "Dad, this has gone too far," Daniel muttered, voice tight. Gregory shot him a glare that silenced him instantly. She accepted the challenge, didn't she? Let her prove her worth. Or would you rather I remind your little friend from last week about your misstep? Daniel's face went pale. Alicia caught the exchange, and in that instant, she understood. Gregory didn't just control the room, he controlled his own son with the same iron fist. The imbalance of power was suffocating. Gregory Lancaster had money, reputation, and the loyalty of 100 sycophants. Alicia had nothing. A contract cleaning job, a worn pair of shoes, and an apron that still carried the scent of bleach from earlier that day. But appearances deceived. While the guests jeered, Alicia's gaze drifted across the ballroom. She studied the grand mirrors, the velvet curtains, the polished parquet where countless dances had been performed. Her fingers twitched faintly at her side, as though remembering movements long buried. Someone in the crowd whispered, "She's probably never set foot on a dance floor in her life." The comment drew another round of chuckles. What they couldn't know was that beneath Alicia Monroe's quiet exterior lived a history of ovations, of costumes glittering under stage lights, of nights when entire theaters rose to their feet for her. A past erased, hidden, buried under years of survival. And now, by Gregory's hand, she stood at the edge of being exposed, not as a clumsy worker, but as something entirely different. The orchestra shuffled nervously. Gregory raised his glass once more, eyes gleaming. "Let's make this interesting. When she loses, and she will lose, I want her on her knees, scrubbing this marble floor before us all. But if she wins, well, a deal is a deal." A murmur ran through the hall. Bets began to fly. 500 on Evelyn, someone shouted. 1,000 she won't last half the song. The air thickened, a mix of perfume and cruelty. But Daniel wasn't laughing. His jaw tightened, his hand clenched at his side. And somewhere, just beyond the glow of chandeliers, Alicia's eyes caught his for the briefest second. It was enough. The stage was set. The power lines had been drawn. Gregory believed he had created a comedy of humiliation, but he had unknowingly lit the fuse for something else entirely. The wagers had barely settled before Gregory raised his voice again, circling the room like a ringmaster in his own cruel circus. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, savoring every syllable, "tonight you'll witness a lesson. Some people simply don't belong on the dance floor, or in this company." A ripple of laughter answered him. Guests leaned back in their chairs, sipping champagne, eager for the show to begin.
Evelyn Lancaster glided to the center of the marble floor, her emerald gown sweeping behind her. She stretched her arms in exaggerated motions, drawing applause before the music even started. The smirk on her face said everything. This wasn't competition, it was dismissal. Alicia stood quietly by the edge, hands at her sides. To the crowd, she looked out of place, a background worker accidentally shoved into the spotlight. To Gregory, she was an easy target, someone he could use to prove dominance in front of Manhattan's elite. Daniel shifted closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to do this," he whispered, almost pleading. But Alicia didn't move her gaze from the floor. "I already said yes," she replied evenly. Gregory clapped once. "Music!" The quartet obeyed, bowing into a cheerful waltz. Evelyn twirled with practiced grace, her steps neat, rehearsed, mechanical. The audience clapped politely, murmuring compliments that sounded more like obligations. When she finished, Gregory led the applause himself, clapping louder than anyone else. "Magnificent! Truly magnificent!" He turned toward Alicia. "Now, our guest performer. Try not to embarrass yourself too quickly." The cruelty was casual, effortless. It had become his signature. Alicia stepped forward, her shoes clicking softly against the polished marble. She positioned herself in the center of the floor, but before the music began, Gregory's voice boomed again. "One more rule," he said, lifting his glass. "If she stumbles even once, she'll clean this entire hall on her knees, tonight." The laughter came fast and sharp this time. Bets doubled. "1,000 says she won't make it halfway," someone called. Another added, "500 she walks out crying before the end." Daniel clenched his fists, his voice low. "This isn't right." Gregory shot him a glare. "Quiet. Watch and learn. The world has rules, son, and she needs to know hers." The weight of his words pressed against the room. For a moment, Alicia's chest tightened. The laughter, the bets, the smug looks, it was all designed to crush her before she even began. But instead of retreating, she slowly rolled her shoulders back, stretching in movements so subtle most guests didn't notice. Her hands brushed against the air as though testing an invisible rhythm. Only one man saw it. At the edge of the room, Harris, the head of security, froze. He knew those movements. They weren't random. They were warm-ups, the same ones he'd seen backstage years ago when he worked theater security. His heart skipped. Could it be? Gregory, oblivious, continued taunting. "Look at her. She can barely stand straight, let alone dance. This is gonna be priceless."
The orchestra hesitated, uncertain. Evelyn waved them on with a flick of her wrist. "Start again," she ordered. The violins lifted. Notes floated through the ballroom, elegant and smooth. Alicia closed her eyes. For a heartbeat, the noise of the room vanished. The smirks, the whispers, the clinking glasses. All that remained was the music, familiar as breath. She inhaled, exhaled, stepped. Gregory chuckled under his breath. "Here we go." But Daniel wasn't laughing anymore. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on Alicia. Something about the way she moved, deliberate, calm, grounded, felt different. And Harris, in the shadows, whispered to himself, "My God, she's really going to do it." The hall still buzzed with bets and laughter, but the shift had begun. A quiet tension was weaving through the room, invisible but undeniable. Alicia opened her eyes. Her first step onto the marble wasn't clumsy. It wasn't hesitant. It was controlled, exact, purposeful. And though no one realized it yet, the balance of power in the Lancaster ballroom had already begun to tilt. The waltz carried on, filling the room with sweeping strings, but something was different now. Alicia wasn't rushing to keep up or fumbling with the rhythm. Each small stretch, each subtle movement was deliberate, muscle memory awakening.
From the sidelines, Harris watched closely. His years as head of security had taught him to notice the smallest details others missed. The way Alicia's foot angled before a turn, the quiet discipline in her shoulders. These weren't the steps of an amateur. They were habits carved from years of training. He leaned toward her as she paused near the edge of the floor, voice low, almost hidden beneath the music. "I've seen you before," he murmured. 15 years ago. New York Ballet, principal dancer, Alicia Marin." Alicia froze for a fraction of a second. The name, her name, hung in the air like a ghost. She turned her head slightly, eyes narrowing. "You remember that?" "I was working security at the National Theater the night you danced Swan Lake," Harris said. His tone wasn't flattery, it was recognition. "The papers said the accident ended everything. They said you'd never walk the same again." "The papers said a lot of things," Alicia replied quietly. Her gaze flicked back to Gregory, who was laughing with guests as if he'd already won. For the first time that evening, a small smile touched her lips. Not the smile of someone amused, but of someone ready. Harris straightened, lowering his voice further. "What they're doing here, it's wrong. If you want this on record, I can film it. Every word, every face." Alicia's eyes met his, calm, focused. "Do it. Tonight isn't just about me. It's about every person he's ever treated as less." Harris nodded. He slipped his phone into recording mode, tucking it subtly into his jacket pocket with the lens peeking out. From that angle, it caught Gregory's smug expression, Evelyn's forced elegance, and the entire crowd leaning forward for spectacle. Back on the dance floor, Alicia adjusted her stance. The orchestra reset the music at Gregory's demand, but she didn't flinch. She was ready now. The whispers continued among the guests. "She's going to embarrass herself. She doesn't stand a chance." The laughter rolled again, shallow and cruel. But Alicia no longer heard them. Instead, she heard the echo of another time, standing backstage with point shoes in her hands, the roar of audiences that once rose to their feet for her, the thrill of flight in every leap.
She had lost it all in one night. The accident, the coma, the grueling years of therapy. She had convinced herself she was finished, that those stages belonged to another life. And yet, here she was, forced into the spotlight again, not by choice, but by cruelty. And maybe that was exactly what it would take. She inhaled slowly. Harris whispered one last line from the shadows. "Show them who you are." Alicia opened her eyes. The doubt, the laughter, the mockery, none of it mattered anymore. She wasn't just a cleaner being ridiculed in a gilded ballroom. She was Alicia Marin, and she had spent her life turning music into movement, pain into power. And as the violins swelled, she stepped forward, no longer hiding. The orchestra reset. The violins trembled into the opening bars, hesitant at first, as if even the musicians doubted what was about to unfold. Evelyn Lancaster had just finished her demonstration, a neat, technically acceptable waltz polished by years of private lessons. Polite applause followed, the kind given out of courtesy, not awe. Gregory raised his glass. "Now our guest," he announced, grinning wide. "Try not to trip too quickly." The room chuckled on cue. Bets were shouted across tables, money exchanged hands. The marble floor glistened under chandelier light, waiting. Alicia stepped forward. Her apron brushed lightly at her knees, shoes worn, clothes plain. To most eyes, she looked like a placeholder in a play she had no right to star in. But then she lifted her chin, and with that single motion, the air shifted. "Play it from the beginning," she said to the musicians. Gregory barked a laugh. "Oh, she wants a second chance. Lovely. By all means, humor her." The violins obeyed, and with the first few notes, Alicia moved. At first, her steps were restrained, simple, almost timid, as if luring the crowd into their own expectations. Whispers spread. See, she doesn't know what she's doing. She's stalling. But then, with the swell of the strings, Alicia turned. It wasn't ballroom anymore. It wasn't a clumsy imitation. It was ballet, refined, soaring, precise. Her body stretched through space with a fluidity that made time itself hesitate. Each spin, each lift of her arms, each extension of her leg carried years of discipline and artistry. The guests fell silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Glasses hovered mid-air. Even the gamblers, money still clenched in their hands, forgot to cheer. Gregory's smirk faded, confusion knitting across his face. Evelyn's forced smile cracked. Alicia leapt into a sequence, piquets turning into flawless pirouettes, then unfolding into a grand jeté that cut across the marble like a flash of lightning. The chandeliers glittered above her as if bowing to her command. Gasps echoed. A woman near the front clutched her pearls. Another whispered, "I've seen that before. That sequence, its signature. But where?" On the sidelines, Harris kept his phone steady, recording not just Alicia, but the shifting faces in the room, the awe, the disbelief, the dawning recognition. And then it happened. The final crescendo of the waltz arrived, and Alicia unleashed a chain of fouettes, rapid spins on one leg, relentless, unstoppable. Each rotation built on the last until the audience couldn't count them anymore. When the music crashed to its end, Alicia landed in a pose both powerful and vulnerable, arms wide, head high, chest lifted. For a breath, there was nothing. Absolute silence.
Then the ballroom erupted. Applause thundered so hard it rattled the windows. People leapt to their feet, shouting "Bravo" and "Extraordinary," as if they had witnessed not just a dance, but a resurrection. Gregory stood frozen, pale, his hand trembling around his glass. Evelyn stared as though she'd seen a ghost. And Harris stepped forward, voice loud, cutting through the roar of applause. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed the return of Alicia Marin, former principal dancer of the New York Ballet." The name hit the crowd like a strike of lightning. Gasps spread in waves. Some clapped harder, others whispered frantically, remembering the tragedy, the accident, the disappearance. Evelyn stammered, "That's impossible. She's gone. She never danced again." "Clearly," Alicia said at last, her voice calm, carrying across the room, "rumors of my end were exaggerated." Laughter rippled, but this time not cruel. The tide had shifted. Harris lifted his phone, playing back the recording of Gregory's booming voice from earlier. "If she dances better than my wife, I'll marry her to my son." Every cruel add-on, every taunt, every condition rang out clearly, undeniable. The room fell still. Gregory's face turned ashen. That was a joke," he barked. No one expects me to—" "This isn't a joke," Alicia interrupted, her gaze unshaken. "It's accountability. You made a promise in front of them all." The crowd murmured, shifting uncomfortably. Integrity mattered in this room of reputations, contracts, and power, and Gregory had just gambled his away. Daniel stepped forward, breaking his father's grip for the first time. His voice was steady, clear. "If my father won't honor his word, I will. Not because I have to, but because any man would be proud to stand beside someone with your courage." A hush fell. The unexpected defiance stung sharper than Alicia's performance. Gregory's control was slipping, and everyone knew it. "You ungrateful boy," Gregory seethed, voice cracking. "If you do this, you're out of the company, out of this family." Daniel met his father's glare. "Then so be it. There are things more important than money, like integrity." Applause rose again, softer this time, but pointed, approval for Daniel's stand.
Alicia turned toward Gregory, who was visibly unraveling. His empire of control, his carefully crafted dominance, was dissolving before 200 witnesses. 15 years ago, Alicia said, her voice firm, people decided I had no value because I could no longer dance as perfectly as before. Tonight, you tried to strip me of dignity because of my work, my clothes, my place in your world. But the truth is simple. Real nobility isn't inherited or purchased. It's revealed in how we treat others when we think no one is watching. The room was silent, the words sinking deep. Gregory tried one last time, shouting, "This is blackmail!" "No," Alicia corrected, steady, "this is justice." And with that, the hall exploded in applause once more. Gregory staggered, his glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the marble, the final echo of a man undone by his own arrogance. The applause didn't stop. Even as Gregory stormed toward the exit, muttering threats about lawyers and contracts to fix this mess, no one followed him. For the first time in decades, Manhattan's elite weren't orbiting him. They were watching him unravel. By morning, the unraveling was complete. The recording Harris had captured spread online within hours. Millionaire humiliates worker, then gets exposed. Clips of Alicia's waltz went viral, replayed again and again with captions like, "This is what grace looks like," and "Dignity on display."
By noon, Lancaster Holdings stock had dipped. By evening, partners were demanding Gregory's resignation. The board voted him out within a day. His empire, built on intimidation and spectacle, collapsed under the weight of one performance he had thought would destroy someone else. Evelyn Lancaster disappeared quietly, retreating to Europe, where whispers said she filed for divorce. Gregory himself, once the man who could silence rooms with a glance, was last seen being escorted out of his own tower, his name scraped off the headlines and replaced with ridicule. And Alicia? Her phone didn't stop ringing. Companies called, choreographers called, journalists begged for interviews. 3 ballet companies offered her contracts to return, not as a dancer, but as a choreographer and mentor. Lincoln Center extended an invitation for a solo event in her honor. Hollywood producers wanted her story. But the call that mattered most came from a group of children at the community school where she had once volunteered. They pooled their lunch money, $27.50, and mailed it with a note written in shaky handwriting, "So you can teach us again." When Alicia read it, her eyes filled. For all the glamorous offers, that was the one she couldn't refuse. 6 months later, the Alicia Marin Arts Academy opened in a converted warehouse in Harlem. Funded not by corporations, but by donations that poured in from around the world, it became a place where children of every background could step into a studio, feel the floor under their feet, and discover the kind of dignity Gregory Lancaster had tried to strip away. On opening night, Daniel Lancaster stood among the crowd, not as an heir to his father's empire, but as the first donor to a school his father would have mocked. He had left the company willingly, choosing to start over, pouring himself into projects that focused on fairness and social responsibility. "You rebuilt more than your own life," Daniel told Alicia quietly, handing her a bouquet of garden flowers he had grown himself. "You rebuilt hope for a lot of us." Alicia smiled, watching her students stumble through their first clumsy steps. She didn't correct them harshly. She encouraged them, because she knew what it felt like to stumble, to fall, to be told it was over. And yet, here she stood, proof that falling wasn't the end. It was part of the dance. In the distance, Harris leaned against the studio doorway, arms crossed, a proud grin tugging at his face. "Told you the world needed to see," he said. Alicia laughed softly, adjusting a student's posture. "It wasn't about me," she replied. "It was about reminding them that dignity can't be stolen, not by money, not by power, not by cruelty." The children clapped along to the rhythm, awkward but joyful, filling the room with energy that money couldn't buy.
Gregory Lancaster's name was fading into footnotes of scandal, but Alicia's name, Alicia Marin, was being spoken again with admiration, not as a victim of tragedy, but as a symbol of resilience. And as she stood in that studio, surrounded by laughter and music, she knew her real triumph wasn't in humiliating the man who once mocked her. It was in building something so beautiful that his cruelty seemed small in comparison. The studio lights dimmed as evening settled outside, the city humming just beyond the tall windows. Inside, laughter and music lingered in the air, children trying their first leaps, their sneakers squeaking against the polished floor.
Alicia stood at the center, guiding a girl no taller than her waist through the simplest of steps. The child stumbled, nearly falling, but Alicia caught her hand gently, steadying her. "See," Alicia whispered, "falling isn't failure. It's just part of the dance." The girl's eyes lit up, and she tried again, clumsy, determined, smiling this time. Around them, the room filled with the rhythm of small beginnings, hope stitched into every movement. From the doorway, Harris watched quietly, his phone tucked away now. He wasn't recording anymore. He didn't need to. The world had already seen the performance that changed everything. This moment was just for them. Daniel stepped inside, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked himself from the small garden he'd planted outside the academy. He placed them in a vase by the mirror, their colors glowing against the reflection of children spinning in mismatched clothes. "You've built something beautiful," he said softly. Alicia looked around the room, at the peeling paint they had covered with murals, at the laughter bouncing off the walls, at the sunlight spilling across faces that believed in themselves for the first time. "This," she answered, "is better than any stage I've ever stood on." For a moment, the room felt timeless. No chandeliers, no marble, no champagne glasses clinking in mockery. Just ordinary kids daring to be extraordinary. And that was the true victory. Because Alicia's revenge was never about destroying Gregory Lancaster. His fall was inevitable. The weight of arrogance always is. Her triumph was this, proving that dignity, once reclaimed, becomes a gift that multiplies. She smiled, watching the children stumble, recover, and rise again. Sometimes, she thought, people have to lose everything to discover who they really are. And sometimes, people like Gregory must lose everything to learn who they should never have tried to be. The music swelled once more, not from an orchestra, but from a small speaker in the corner. The children moved together, arms outstretched, faces glowing in the soft light. And Alicia Marin, once erased, now reborn, not only danced again, but taught others that the truest measure of nobility is not in wealth or power, but in how we lift one another when the world tries to push us down. The curtain never fell that night. Instead, it rose on something greater, a legacy of grace, resilience, and the reminder that underestimated souls often carry the brightest light. Life has a way of testing us in the most unexpected places. In a glittering ballroom, Alicia was mocked as if her worth could be measured by her clothes, her job, or the assumptions of the powerful. Yet when the music began, she reminded everyone of a truth as old as time. Dignity does not come from wealth or titles, but from the courage to stand tall when others try to diminish you. We live in a world where prejudice and arrogance still whisper that some lives matter less, that voices can be silenced, that dreams can be dismissed. But Alicia's story reminds us that silence only feeds injustice. By reclaiming her voice, she not only defeated humiliation, she transformed it into a legacy of hope. As the saying goes, you can't keep a good woman down. Her fall was not the end. It was the beginning of something greater. For each of us, the lesson is clear. Don't let anyone write your value in the language of their prejudice. If life knocks you down, rise with grace. If someone tries to shame you, let your light shine brighter. True respect is not demanded. It is earned by living with integrity, even when the world isn't watching.
Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where others underestimated you? How did you respond, and what did you learn? Share your story in the comments. I promise someone out there needs to hear it. And if this story touched your heart, please give it a like to help more people see it, and subscribe so you won't miss the next powerful tale of courage and redemption. Until then, may you carry dignity like a steady flame, bringing light, warmth, and hope wherever life takes you.